Indiana Jones. It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. Indiana Jones Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute, the podcast in which we celebrate and discuss the film Raiders of the Lost Ark 1 minute at a time. I'm Tom Taylor.
I'm Pete Mummert.
And I'm Jerry Porter.
And today we are discussing Minute 14, which begins with Professor Jones successfully spelling Neolithic and ends with some borderline disturbing flirting.
I like he's obviously the lithic thing is a trick he's done for several classes because he's got that smirk on his face.
The kids love this.
I know I'm being adorable here.
I don't know how to spell. That's an H. Wait, that's an I.
No, I think it goes to show you it's just right along the lines 2-bit archeologist.
Yeah, he didn't have a plan for spelling Neolithic.
Yeah,
he sort of knew how to
exactly.
spell it, but he didn't have it totally figured out.
Yeah, he knew it began with an N.
Yeah, that it
and
means new.
some vowels in there.
Yeah. I don't think he's
Yeah,
going to
it would have been
survive
better
the
if
whole
someone
movie.
came and stole the chalk from him while he was writing.
So when I saw this movie for the first time with my cousin, and we were talking about it later, he admitted that he didn't realize that this was Indiana Jones. That this guy and the guy in the woods, or, the jungle and the desert later and stuff were the same guy. He thought it was like some, nerd who then told Indiana Jones stuff.
Well, I was wondering. First of all, now you see what type of doctor he is. I feel like he's a
Right.
professor.
Yeah,
All right.
makes
And
sense.
second of all, it made me wonder. I was like, so that whole idol thing, Barranca and Satipo and the whole thing, was that just his spring break?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Or
was that
just a long weekend? Yeah.
exactly? Was it like a Columbus Day thing, and he rushed down there? I mean, clearly, as we exposed, he didn't have very far to travel necessarily.
Well, maybe it was over the summer. Maybe it was, but no, that does freak me out. Like, every time I'm like, well, how does he, this is a huge part of, like, what he does. Like, how does he, grade papers while he's on the plane with Jock or something? Or I don't even know. How does he do both at the same time?
When you notice that, obviously, the whole class is women.
Yeah,
And
except for that
almost,
With one exception.
Yeah, that guy
with
in the
one
front row
exception.
who is just as in love with him as the girls are. The guy with the
Yep.
bow tie.
But it
little
made me
sweater
think
vest.
because you mentioned before, this is supposed to be Yale or New England college.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Where am I going?
To the girls' locker room that shouldn't exist because it's probably an all-boys school or something?
Yeah, you know
know
me. No, I did look up when did the Ivy Leagues go co-ed.
Oh, and what'd you find out?
It was really damn late.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was
1982?
way past 1936. No, I mean, it was, I think, like 1967, 1963, 1969, a bunch of different ones.
Yeah.
But my point is, it wasn't 1936. And so you'd think, oh, but maybe he's at a women's college.
Yeah, but there's
And-
that dude.
There's that one dude. Yeah, it kind
Yeah.
of ruins the whole thing.
So
Then I looked up Stanford, and Stanford actually did have women in the student body really early because we were one of the East Coast or West Coast. Stanford admitted women, like I think from the giddy up, like 1888 or something like that.
Huh. And did they have an incredible archaeology
Good
department?
for Stanford.
Well, they had women who could write backwards on their eyelids.
Yeah, so they're talking about. I always love the. He's got that drawing on the board that looks like he's like mapping out a D&D adventure or something. Like he's the dungeon master. But is that's a real thing? The Turkteen?
It's kind of a real thing.
Okay.
Turkdean Barrow near Hazleton. And this is based on, they're all over southern England are these things called long barrows. which people aren't entirely sure what they are, but they think they were Neolithic burial sites.
Huh.
They would find human and animal remains or pottery or maybe some flints. And so I guess what I would take from this is he's talking about some kind of English burial site near Hazelton.
Crazy.
The crazier that he's actually talking about archaeology.
No, I was going to say, yeah, he's actually talking about a real thing. He could have made up anything. Or the writers could have made up anything. Like, oh, yeah.
That's like
Tutankhamun in there.
Yeah, I wonder, because they obviously had people working on this movie who understood archaeology, and it makes me wonder if that just drove them mad, the grave robbing aspect, or if that's a built-in feature of Indiana Jones, if he's fighting some kind of internal struggle and he knows.
I wonder if this classroom's, like if his little thing about this burial site, if that was all actually in the original screenplay, or if they had somebody come in and say, here, fill in these X's that we put in here with some archaeology stuff that he can say. Or if like Lawrence Kasdan was like, I'll learn exactly enough about some archaeological dig.
Yeah.
Throw that in there.
Well, he has one line in there that's amazing. He's like, which brings us to, one of the sort of enemies of archaeology, which is folklore.
Mm-hmm.
And he, because apparently there's a golden coffin,
which is a real legend in Southern England.
Oh, really?
And then people go in looking for the golden coffin, and they mess up the ruins. And he says, one of the problems with that is that's why the whole place was in disrepair, except for Chamber 3, which was undisturbed. And it made you think, wait a minute, didn't we just have this?
Yeah, and are we going to have a lot more of it?
Yeah, didn't we just have this problem where you were the guy
because
who was looking for the golden
followed
coffin?
some local folklore, and
yeah,
led to the generally poor condition of the find.
Because this sort of thing is always like, this kind of dialogue is usually, like foreshadowing of something that's going to come up later in a story, it's planting in our heads like, oh, there's an issue with, folklore, getting people to rob these sites and stuff. And for a long time I was like, oh, it's interesting that doesn't actually play that role. It's just sort of like a thing he's talking about. But then you think about it, it's like, well, actually, yeah, he's learned about this thing that he's going to go try and get, and he knocks walls down and blows up planes and stuff, and everything except for Chamber 3 is disturbed.
But this makes me wonder sort of how self-aware Indy is.
Yeah.
Because he says, don't confuse that with robbing. He talks about grave robbing right in this minute. And I'm wondering, does he know he's sort of referring to himself, or does he view himself as something other than that?
It's funny because in the old 1981 making of special that I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Harrison Ford says that. He's like, oh, he's a professor by day, and he pauses for a minute. He's like, and he's a grave robber by night, and he starts laughing about it. I'm like, I remember seeing that as a kid and being like, well, that's hysterical. That's really funny that if you think about it that way, if you think about it, that's kind of true. So Harrison Ford at least was aware of that. But yeah, I don't know. That's an actually excellent point. Indy, in a lot of ways, doesn't seem that self-aware, really.
No.
And we'll see more examples of that later, probably.
Yeah, I guess he's sort of like the cop who steals things at night.
Well, he's like,
Right.
you always think he's doing it, for some greater good.
Yeah.
But other than, what may be the museum.
Yeah. Or
And you wonder,
studying.
you're like, it's all right. It's a museum. Like, it's, what is it? The Stanford, archaeology museum on the third floor of,
And he's destroyed
small time hall.
He's destroyed an entire temple,
Yeah.
filled with context and the entire history of this people, so that somebody can be walking to class on the third floor and see this little idol in a glass case.
Well, maybe his deepest fear as an archaeologist and as a professor is that he knows that there are these things out there in the world, like undiscovered or unreachable, and that if he doesn't get them and put them in a museum, somebody like Belloc will show up and just sell them to some jerk on the street or something, and they won't be treated with the proper respect or studied or made available to all the white people who want to see the cool stuff.
That is a very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry.
That is a very, very good point. Because maybe that's what's going on. He knows Belloc is going to steal it and sell it, and it'll be gone on some fat cat's mantelpiece forever. Like their second home in Monaco. And, maybe he's like, I have to steal it.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't have a choice. I have to steal it before it hits the black market.
Right. For its own sake.
I'm starting to like this guy.
Sure. It's got a twisted sort of logic that kind of works.
Speaking of starting to like this guy, this scene was one of those, you're like, oh my gosh, this changed my life. You mean you can be smart and hot?
That's really interesting because I never thought of this until I was watching this minute by minute, but the girl does the thing with her eyelids, which again completely reminds me of Mad Magazine because that was like a huge thing in the background of the artwork in their version of this. But his reaction is like, oh my gosh, what the heck's going on? What? Oh, I think this girl has some sort of male-female crush on me. Like she wants to perform some sort of mate. Like he doesn't get what's going on at all. He's totally thrown by it. But then later on, not to jump ahead or spoil anything, we find out that he knew probably a younger girl at one point, and she may have had something written on her eyelids, possibly, and he responded to that message, and I'm. It's funny in the scene, but you kind of again, he's not that self-aware. He's like, well, yet again, one of my room full of female students is kind of into me.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go down to biology and ask him what's going on.
Yeah. Professor.
But it sounds terrible. But as a young, as a kid, you're like, wow, he stayed in school, just like the commercial said.
He's even got glasses on.
Yeah, he's got a whole room full of women. and one dude. One dude with an apple.
And he likes archaeology too.
Yeah. Women want to be with him, and that one guy wants to be with him.
And that one guy wants to be with him, and he gets a free apple.
Yeah. What more could anyone ask? There's my Superman the movie reference for the day.
Is this sort of a Clark Kent type touch in the movie?
Maybe.
Speaking of Superman,
that's why my cousin didn't recognize him. He had glasses on.
I think you're absolutely right.
Oh, we meet Marcus for the first time too. Marcus Brody.
Yeah, he has sort of a interesting introduction too. He kind of has a longing glance at another co-ed there.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting? I was just looking at some of the deleted scenes, and there's one. I think that girl is in a scene like coming up that's like cut out when Indy's like on his way to meet the dudes who Marcus brought, and there's some like back and forth between them about like, oh, I thought we were gonna meet, in your office or something. He's like, oh, I can't do it, and it's. The way I'm describing it, it sounds like, oh, I thought we were going to meet in your office, Dr. Jones. But he doesn't play it like that. Oh, it's like, geez, I got my arms full of stuff. I can't make it now. I'll have to talk about your paper later or something. So it's like kind of a weird scene. Like, oh, wait, is this supposed to be that he's like sleeping around with his students? Or is it just like that he's a flustered, actual nerd playboy? It's weird.
Yeah, I think you could read it both ways.
Yeah,
well, he's got it all. except the idol.
Yeah, that poor guy.
I like that the globe on his desk, no matter which direction the camera is pointing towards it, it's always pointed towards Africa. Like all roads in this movie are leading towards Africa.
It's foreshadowing.
And there's a skeleton on the wall, and you're like, "What the hell's that doing there?"
Yeah. When does he refer to that?
It's a completely blank skeleton.
Yeah.
It doesn't say like, oh, here's the femur, and there's no, or here's the skeleton of Lucy, the original hominid from. It's just like a skeleton.
Yeah, you have bones in you.
Yes.
Maybe it was Halloween break.
Don't get scared, kids. It's just a picture of a skeleton.
Like I'm gonna go through that Sears and Roebuck catalog and order a skeleton.
Well, all right. Do we have anything else for this minute?
I do not.
No.
Nor do I. But, Pete, why don't you tell the nice people how they can get in touch with us?
Please come join us at IndianaJonesMinute.com. Join us on Facebook. Subscribe to us via iTunes. And while you're doing all that, we highly recommend that you give our good friends over at Star Wars Minute a listen if you haven't already.
The Star Wars Minute. Oh, sorry.
I've
always wanted to do that.
Best podcast going. And if you like them, you may be surprised by our very special guests coming up next week.
So come back. Oh, wait, but first come back tomorrow. Tomorrow's just Friday. Come back tomorrow for minute 15 of Raiders of the Lost Ark right here on the Indiana Jones Minute.
Love you.
Love you.
Folklore's not that bad.